Hello. This is another one of the videos on the Universal House of Justice, and the Guardianship comes from an old manuscript of mine, the Universal House of Justice and the Baha'i World, 1963 to 73. So, as with the other videos in this series, the main source material is the book Messages, Universal House of Justice, 1963-1986. And then there's also an article which I co-wrote with Moojan Momen some time ago on the Baha'i faith in 1957-1988, which provides context. I'll put the references to both of those in the notes below the video. So after the House of Justice had announced that it could find no way in which a second guardian to succeed Sheikh Effendi could be appointed, many Baha'is were troubled, first by the idea that Abdul Baha had referred to a line of guardians, but the line had ended abruptly after the very first incumbent, and secondly that the House and the Guardianship had been envisaged as twin institutions which would function together in a complementary manner. Responding to these uncertainties, the House composed three major letters on the issues involved, and today's video will finish off talking about the second of those letters, dated the 27th of May 1966. So this particular letter was addressed to an individual, but it was widely circulated. The letter itself covers 7 topics, the first 3 of which we covered in the previous video, and now we'll move on to the last 4. That's faith and the limits of understanding, the role of individual interpretation, clinging to the covenant and to the Universal House of Justice, and the performance of necessary functions. So the first of these is faith and the limits of understanding. For the House of Justice, service to the cause of God required absolute fidelity and integrity, as well as unwavering faith. For some Baha'is, the absence of a successor to Sheikh Effendi was evidently a major intellectual problem, and the belief that information was perhaps being withheld from Baha'is for the good of the cause had begun to circulate. The House assured its correspondents that this was not the case. More generally, it stressed that if it did not always go into detail on some matters, this is not because of secretiveness, but rather because the House was determined to refrain from making any statement that could be construed as an unwarrantable inference or unauthorized interpretation of the Baha'i writing. The Baha'i should know that this was God's cause. He had promised that its light would not fail. Given this promise, the Baha'is should both be faithful and have faith. Only evil would result if the Baha'is tried to take responsibility for the future of the faith into their own hands and tried to force it into ways that they wished. This was what had happened in the past in previous dispensations, religions. Believers had been over-anxious to encompass God's message within the framework of their own limited understanding, to define doctrines whose definition was beyond their power, to explain mysteries which were beyond their comprehension at the time, and argue that such and such was true because it seemed desirable and necessary. Such compromises with essential truth had now to be scrupulously avoided. The Baha'is had to adhere strictly to the clear texts, be conscious of the limitations of their own knowledge, and not copy the spiritual pride of the past. Intellectual honesty and humility were required. As to the role of individual interpretation, there had to be a clear distinction between the understanding which an individual arrived at as a result of his or her own study of the Baha'i teachings, and the authoritative interpretations which could only be made by a guardian. It was to be remembered that in the Baha'i faith, individual interpretation was regarded as the fruit of man's rational power, and was conducive to a better understanding of the Baha'i teachings. It was not to be suppressed. At the same time, however, it was important that disputes and arguments among the Baha'is be avoided, and that individual Baha'is understood and made clear that their own interpretations were merely personal views. An individual's interpretations were not fixed. Rather, their understanding changed continually as he or she grew in comprehension of the teachings. Thus, an individual's insights could be enlightening and helpful, but they could also be misleading. Therefore, Baha'is should learn both to express their own views without pressing them on their fellow Baha'is, and to listen to the views of others without being overawed or allowing their faith to be shaken. Indeed, the more a Baha'i studied the writings, the more he or she would find in them, and the more he would realize that his previous notions were limited. Clinging to the covenant and to the house. No matter how much the Baha'is were unable to understand either the mystery of Shaykh Effendi's unexpected death and the absence of a successor, or the implications of this development, they all had to cling with assurance to the strong cord of the covenant. They should remember that the Baha'i cause was organic. It grew and developed like a living being. It had often faced crises which had perplexed the Baha'is, but because it was impelled by the immutable purpose of God, it had always overcome such crises and then gone on to greater heights. In the absence of a living guardian, the Universal House of Justice was now the sole infallibly guided institution in the world. It was the House which now bore the responsibility for ensuring the unity and progress of the cause of God in accordance with the revealed word. As indicated by Abdu'l-Baha, it was the center to which all Baha'is should turn. Everyone should seek guidance from the House, and anyone who turned away from it was in grievous error. Again, Shaykh Effendi had made it clear that, in addition to being the highest legislative body in the faith, the House was also the apex of the Baha'i administrative system and the supreme organ of the millennial future Baha'i Commonwealth. Moreover, Shaykh Effendi had specified that the House would be responsible for such fundamental functions as the formulation of future worldwide teaching plans, conducting Baha'i administrative affairs, and the guidance, organization, and unification of Baha'i activities throughout the world. It also indicated that it would function to safeguard the integrity and unity of the faith, and that its members as a body would be the recipients of the divine guidance, which is at once the lifeblood and ultimate safeguard of the Baha'i revelation. Again, he had predicted that the House would come to be regarded as, famous quotation, the last refuge of a tottering civilization. As the House had already stated, it was not possible for it to legislate to make it possible to appoint either another guardian or any more hands of the cause. It had a duty, however, to do everything it could to ensure the performance of the functions it shared with these mighty institutions. This is a theme we'll come back to in the next chapter when I talk about the development of the institution of the hands of the cause. The Baha'i should note that in the Baha'i system, some functions were the exclusive reserve of certain institutions, but that other functions were shared in common, even though one particular institution was designated to take a leading role in their performance. For example, whilst the Hands of the Cause was specifically assigned the duty of protecting and propagating the faith, the House of Justice and the spiritual assemblies shared that same duty, and indeed every individual Baha'i had an obligation to spread the faith through teaching. Thus, whilst the House could not undertake any functions which had been exclusively assigned to the guardianship, notably the authority to make authoritative interpretations of the Baha'i sacred writings, there were many functions which it shared with the guardianship, and which it could therefore exercise in the absence of a living guardian. Central here was the common and fundamental objective shared by the two institutions to ensure the continuity of that divinely appointed authority which flowed from Baha'u'llah, to safeguard the unity of the Baha'is and to maintain the integrity and flexibility of the Baha'i teachings. Specific duties in this regard were that the House had to devise means whereby the function of protection and propagation should be properly discharged in the future, receive and disperse the Hurla, talk about that in more detail much later, and make provision for the removal of any individual House member who committed a sin, quote, injurious to the common weal. More generally, and above all else, with perfect faith in Baha'u'llah, it had proclaimed his cause and enforced his law, so that the millennial Muslim peace, which he had foreseen, would be firmly established and the foundation of the kingdom of God on earth accomplished. So thank you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons. Without them I wouldn't be able to make these videos. You're very welcome to support my channel if you should so wish. Do like, comment and share on the videos, it really does help. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. I'll give a Patreon link below if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll finally finish off this long chapter on the Universal House of Justice and the Guardianship. As usual, my apologies for the various noises of traffic and working you might hear in the background of the video. And again, my apologies for not having had time to reactivate either the track for social science or the track for history. So hopefully that will eventually come around, but not just yet. So, have a good day.